In the year 2167, humanity had expanded far beyond Earth. After years of colonizing distant planets and moons, human civilization now sprawled across the stars. But despite all the technological advancements, human connection had become harder to find. The future was one of isolation, where technology brought convenience but did little for the heart. Mark Hayes sat alone in his small apartment on the edge of a mining colony on the planet Arton 5. The walls were bare, save for a few personal items he had clung to from his life before the disaster, the life he once had with his wife, Ella. He had lost her 2 years ago in a space accident. The pain of her absence was still fresh, the wounds deep. The loneliness weighed on him daily. Mark had tried to move on, or at least distract himself. He'd spent countless hours at work, mining precious minerals deep beneath the planet's surface. But no matter how much he threw himself into his job, it never quite filled the void that had opened when Ella was gone. One evening, as the pale red sun set over the horizon of Arton 5, Mark was scrolling through the endless feed of ads on his terminal. His eyes wandered, not really focusing on anything, until one ad caught his attention. Looking for companionship? Find your perfect match in the galaxy's largest network of mail-order brides. Find love. Find a future. It wasn't the first time he had seen such an ad, but today something about it felt different. Maybe it was his growing sense of loneliness, or perhaps it was just the desperation for something, anything to fill the emptiness. Without thinking, Mark clicked the ad. A page opened, showing profiles of women from various planets, each with their own unique backgrounds and interests. Most of the profiles were filled with glowing descriptions: beautiful women, healthy, accomplished in various fields. Mark's eyes scanned the options but felt nothing. They all seemed too perfect, too polished. His mind went back to Ella, and he realized that he wasn't looking for someone perfect. He wanted someone real, someone who could understand what it felt like to lose someone, to struggle. That's when he found Gwen's profile. Her photo was plain, almost unremarkable compared to the other women in the system. She was heavier than most of the women in the profiles, her face rounder and her figure larger. The description, however, caught his eye. Gwen, age 29, a scientist skilled in biology and engineering, former leader of a research program on Earth. I have been rejected by others because of my appearance, but I promise my heart is full of love and passion. I'm looking for someone who can see beyond the surface. Mark paused. He'd read many profiles before, but this one felt different. He could sense the pain behind her words, the honesty that stood out in a sea of surface-level perfection. And then it struck him, the reason he had avoided her profile in the first place. Her appearance. Society in the colonies, just like back on Earth, was obsessed with beauty. Gwen wasn't the standard. She didn't fit into the narrow mold of what was considered attractive. Yet despite his hesitation, something within him made him keep reading. Her words spoke of strength, of resilience. She wasn't perfect in the traditional sense, but perhaps in a way she was more than perfect. For hours, Mark sat in front of his terminal, torn. Could he truly accept someone who didn't fit the ideal? He couldn't ignore the judgmental thoughts that crept into his mind. But at the same time, he felt a stirring inside him, something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. After what felt like an eternity, Mark closed his eyes and clicked the message option. "I'd like to get to know you, Gwen," he typed. "Tell me more about your life." He hit send before he could second-guess himself. The next morning, Gwen's reply came faster than he expected. She thanked him for reaching out and began sharing stories about her life on Earth before she had joined the mail-order bride service. She told him about her career as a scientist, her research in biochemistry, and how her size had caused her to be overlooked for important roles in her field. But she had refused to let that stop her. She had pushed herself harder, hoping to prove her worth to the world, but instead, she had been met with rejection time and time again. Her words resonated with Mark. He, too, had known rejection in his own way, first losing his wife, and now feeling as if he had lost his place in the world. His mind wandered, wondering if someone like Gwen could truly understand that feeling. He found himself wanting to know more about her, not just about her struggles, but about her hopes and dreams. Days turned into weeks, and their conversations grew longer, more personal. Gwen would share her thoughts on the universe, the wonders of space, and the beauty she still saw in the world despite her hardships. Mark found himself looking forward to every message, her words a welcome distraction from his solitary existence. Yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was holding back. There was something about her that intrigued him, something he couldn't place. But at the same time, his mind kept reminding him of the way society would view her, how they would judge her for her weight, her appearance. How could he possibly move forward with someone who would always be seen as different? The doubts gnawed at him, but they were slowly fading. Something deep inside told him that Gwen was more than enough just as she was. And for the first time in a long time, Mark felt like he was beginning to see past the surface of things. He was beginning to see Gwen for who she truly was. Then, one evening, just as Mark was about to log off for the night, his terminal chimed with an incoming message. It was from Gwen. "I know you probably think I'm just a mail-order bride, someone who doesn't belong in your world," she wrote. "But I believe there's more to us than the surface. I hope we can meet someday. Even if that never happens, I just want you to know that I see you, Mark. I see your heart." Mark felt a rush of emotion. He wasn't sure what was happening, but he felt drawn to Gwen in a way he hadn't been drawn to anyone in years. Her words spoke to him, resonating deep within him. That night, as he sat in his empty apartment, Mark made a decision. He would meet Gwen. He didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long while, he was ready to step out of the shadows of his past and embrace something new, something real. He typed his reply, "I want to meet you. Gwen, let's see where this takes us," and with that, he sent it. As the message left his terminal, Mark felt a sense of calm wash over him. Whatever came next, he was ready. For the first time in years, he was no longer afraid of the future. Mark hadn't expected a response so quickly. After sending his message to Gwen, he had spent the following days waiting, unsure of what would come next. But when the notification chimed that Gwen had replied, he felt a sudden wave of excitement. He hesitated for a moment before opening the message, his fingers hovering over the terminal. "I'm coming," the message read. "I've booked my transport to Arton 5. I'll be there in 3 days." The words seemed to jump off the screen. Mark read them again just to make sure. Gwen was coming? To see him? The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. What if she was nothing like he expected? What if he was nothing like she imagined? For the first time in a long while, Mark found himself pacing around his apartment. His mind raced with questions. Should he prepare for her arrival? Should he make the place nicer, clean up the mess in the corner? Or was it better to let things be? He didn't know what to expect from this meeting, and that uncertainty made him nervous. But there was also something else, something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. The next 3 days felt like they dragged on forever. Mark found himself checking his terminal constantly, as though waiting for a message from Gwen. The hours blended together, and he couldn't focus on anything at work. His mind was always on her, the idea of meeting her, of talking face to face. He tried to imagine what it would be like to see her in person, to finally experience the connection they had built through their messages. When the day arrived, Mark stood in the arrivals area of the colony's main spaceport, his hands in his pockets and his heart beating faster than usual. He had no idea what to expect, but he hoped that Gwen would be just as kind and intelligent in person as she had been in their messages. The spaceport was bustling with activity as ships came and went, cargo being unloaded and travelers moving between terminals. Mark scanned the crowd, feeling out of place among the busy people. His eyes searched for Gwen, though he wasn't sure what she would look like. Would she be as he imagined her? Or would she look different, perhaps even more striking in person? Then he saw her. Gwen was standing near the exit, holding a small bag and looking around, clearly uncertain about where to go. She wasn't what Mark expected. She wasn't strikingly beautiful by the colony's standards, but there was something about her that caught his attention. It wasn't her appearance, it was her presence. She stood there alone, and yet there was something strong in the way she held herself, something that made her stand out in a crowd. Mark took a step forward, his heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't sure if she had seen him yet, but he didn't want to miss the opportunity to introduce himself. He took another step, his mind still racing. But before he could take another step, Gwen turned and their eyes met. For a brief moment, time seemed to stop. There was a silence, a shared understanding between them. And then she smiled. "Mark?" she asked, her voice soft yet clear. Mark felt his breath catch in his throat. He hadn't realized how much he had been holding his breath until that moment. "Gwen," he said, his voice a little shakier than he would have liked. "It's really you." She nodded, stepping forward with a hesitant smile. "It's really me." They stood there for a few seconds, unsure of what to say next. Mark wasn't sure what kind of greeting was appropriate, but he extended his hand, feeling a little awkward. Gwen took it, her grip firm and warm. There was no rush to let go, as if they both needed that brief moment of connection. "I'm glad you came," Mark said, finally breaking the silence. Gwen laughed softly, and the sound was unexpectedly comforting. "I wasn't sure if you'd want to meet me in person," she admitted, glancing around nervously. "But I figured I had to try." Mark could feel the weight of her words, and he immediately felt a surge of sympathy for her. Gwen had already been rejected so many times in her life, and yet, here she was, taking the chance to meet him despite all the risks. It made him want to protect her, to ensure that she never had to feel that kind of rejection again. "I'm glad you did," he said, his voice more sincere than he had intended. "Let's get out of here." They walked through the busy spaceport together, Mark guiding Gwen to the transport that would take them back to his apartment. The ride was quiet, with both of them unsure of what to say, yet comfortable in their silence. Mark had the strangest feeling that the journey had already started, not just in the physical sense, but in the emotional one as well. When they arrived at his apartment, Mark felt a rush of nerves. What if it was awkward? What if they had nothing to talk about once the novelty of meeting in person wore off? He had built up so many expectations, and he couldn't help but wonder if it would all come crashing down. But as they sat down together, the conversation flowed effortlessly. Gwen seemed just as easy to talk to in person as she had been online. She was funny, intelligent, and surprisingly confident, even if she didn't look like what society would consider perfect. Her eyes sparkled when she spoke about her research, about the future of space exploration, and her thoughts on the world she had left behind. Mark couldn't help but be captivated by her passion, the way she spoke with so much energy about the things she loved. For the first time in a long time, he felt inspired. "You know," Gwen said after a while, leaning back slightly, "I never thought I'd be here. I always thought I'd be stuck on Earth trying to prove that I was worth something." Mark looked at her, his heart aching at the vulnerability she had shown. "I don't think you need to prove anything to anyone," he said quietly. "Not to me, anyway." Gwen smiled, but there was something in her eyes that suggested she didn't fully believe him. She had been hurt too many times to simply take someone else's words at face value. Mark understood that, but for the first time, he truly felt like he could make a difference. The evening continued with a sense of ease that Mark hadn't expected. As they shared a simple meal, they talked about their hopes for the future, their fears, and everything in between. It wasn't perfect, and it didn't need to be. What mattered was that they were connecting in a way that neither of them had experienced in years. By the time Gwen stood to leave, Mark realized that he had forgotten to be nervous. The awkwardness that he had feared never came, and he found himself hoping for more. He walked her back to the transport, their hands brushing for a moment before they parted ways. "I'm glad you came," Mark said again, his voice soft but sincere. "I'm glad I did, too," Gwen replied with a smile that made Mark's heart swell. As the transport disappeared into the distance, Mark stood there for a long moment staring after it. Something had changed in him tonight. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, he was willing to see where it would go. The days following Gwen's arrival in Mark's life seemed to pass by in a blur. Mark found himself eagerly awaiting her visits, their conversations filling him with a sense of excitement he hadn't experienced in years. The distance between their worlds seemed to shrink with every interaction, and soon, it felt like they had known each other for much longer than just a few weeks. But even as their bond deepened, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Life on the colony wasn't just about relationships, it was about survival. The tension in the air was palpable, and the recent increase in reports of alien activity made it clear that their peaceful existence might be under threat. Mark's mind kept wandering to the growing fears about their security, but he didn't want to let that affect his time with Gwen. Gwen, on the other hand, was more perceptive than Mark realized. Despite her outward calm, she had noticed the subtle changes in the way the colony had been operating. There were whispers of strange sightings near the edge of the colony. Some had been dismissive of the rumors, but others, like Gwen, had no reason to ignore the signs. One evening, as Mark and Gwen sat together in his apartment sipping on a hot drink, she broke the silence with a thoughtful frown. "Have you heard about the increased patrols near the outer colonies?" she asked, her voice steady but edged with concern. Mark looked at her, trying to mask the unease that suddenly crept into his chest. "Yeah, I've heard some things," he said cautiously, unsure of how much he wanted to discuss. "There's talk of a rogue alien faction gathering. They've been skirmishing with nearby colonies." Gwen leaned forward, her eyes narrowing slightly. "It's not just talk. I've been looking into the data, Mark. Something bigger is coming, and if we don't prepare, it could hit us harder than we expect." Mark's stomach dropped. He had known something was wrong, but hearing it from Gwen made it feel real. She had always been the logical one, the scientist who could piece together the puzzle when everyone else was just looking at the edges. And now she was telling him that they might be on the verge of something much worse than any of them had anticipated. "I know you're right," he said, his voice low, "but what can we do? We're just a small colony. We don't have the resources to fight off an invasion." Gwen took a deep breath, her gaze focused on the far wall as though she was searching for something just out of reach. "Maybe not, but we have brains and we have each other. Sometimes that's enough." Mark stared at her for a long moment. She wasn't giving up, wasn't letting fear take over. Instead, she was offering him a solution, a way to fight back even when the odds seemed impossible. It was a quality Mark had noticed in her from the start, and it was what drew him to her in the first place. Gwen wasn't just someone who survived. She thrived. "What do you mean?" Mark asked, feeling a flicker of hope spark within him. "I've been studying their tactics, their technology. We may be small, but there's something we can do. I can work on a plan. Maybe find a way to use their weaknesses against them. If we can create some kind of countermeasure, we might have a fighting chance." Mark wasn't sure if it was her confidence or the way she spoke with such authority, but her words filled him with a sense of purpose. "You really think we can fight back?" he asked, his voice more hopeful than he had expected. "I know we can," Gwen replied, her eyes meeting his with a firmness that left no room for doubt. "We've just got to believe in ourselves. We can't wait for someone else to save us." For the first time in a while, Mark realized that Gwen wasn't just a woman he had grown close to. She was a force of nature. Her intelligence, her strength, her refusal to give in, these were the things that made her powerful. It was easy to see her as just someone who had been rejected by society for her appearance. But Gwen was so much more. She was a fighter, and now she was offering him the chance to fight alongside her. The next few days were a blur of activity. Mark and Gwen worked together to put together a plan, reaching out to the other colonists who had the skills and resources to help. Gwen's scientific mind was a treasure trove of ideas, and Mark found himself marveling at how quickly she adapted to the challenges they faced. As the colony's defenses were fortified, Mark began to see a side of Gwen he hadn't fully understood before. She wasn't just the woman who had been rejected because of her size. She was the one who could save them all. The tension continued to build as the days passed, and more reports came in about the alien faction moving closer to their colony. Mark and Gwen spent long hours discussing strategies, and as the pressure mounted, their bond only deepened. Mark couldn't help but admire Gwen's resilience, her unwavering determination to protect those around her. She wasn't afraid of the fight ahead. In fact, it seemed like she was born for it. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an orange glow over the barren landscape of Arton 5, Mark and Gwen stood together on the balcony of his apartment watching the stars. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was familiar, filled with a shared understanding of what they were about to face. "I never thought I'd be here," Gwen said softly, her voice almost lost in the quiet. "I never thought I'd be part of something like this. I've always been told that I'm not enough, that I don't fit the ideal." Mark turned to her, his expression serious. "You are more than enough, Gwen. You've shown me that." Gwen smiled, but there was a sadness in her eyes. "You're the first person who's ever said that to me. It's strange. Sometimes I feel like I'm still that girl, the one who was never good enough. But then I remember I'm not alone anymore. We're in this together." Mark reached out, taking her hand in his. "You don't have to fight alone. I'm with you, Gwen. Always." For a moment, there was no need for words. They both knew that the journey ahead would be difficult. They would face dangers, challenges, and fears they hadn't even imagined. but they would face it together. The days turned into nights as the countdown to the alien assault continued. The colony's defenses were ready, but Mark and Gwen knew it would take more than just technology to win this fight. It would take their hearts, their strength, and their unwavering belief that they could survive. The battle was coming. And when it did, Mark and Gwen would be ready.